with you all today. Let's see, I'm going to start by getting a screen share up. So I'm going to use a PowerPoint to kind of guide us through things. Let's see, do you see the PowerPoint currently in full?
Yes, we do.
Okay, great. And you can still see me, correct?
We can, but let's get you more centered here. There we go.
Okay, so yeah, just to quickly give you an overview of how this is going to go, I have some concerns. We might run out of time. So possibly the last film clip will be something that you can explore on your own. I do want to make sure there's time for Q&A if that's something that people want to cover. So I'm going to start briefly with the land acknowledgement, then talk a little about my background, then offer sort of some concepts up that define a lot of work around culturally responsive healthcare. Then I'll talk a bit about Street Level Health Project, our organization as a whole, my work there, and sort of how we work collaboratively and integratively as a healthcare team. Then I'm going to show the trailer to my most recent documentary, which actually features Street Level, so it'll give you sort of a more direct feeling about the clinic. Then I'm going to talk a little about why I started doing film and what that significance was for me. And then I'm going to show you a longer clip about Street Level, focusing on our Mom Guatemalan community and a lot of experiences of that community. Then we'll have some time for breakout rooms to sort of share some of your own perspectives. And then briefly talk about some other film work that I've done and some of the techniques that, you know, seem to work best in my experience for working cross-culturally while doing cinema. So I want to actually also just start out with saying, since I don't know all of you, and since I haven't, you know, had the benefit of hearing your experiences in your words previously, you know, I don't want to assume that what I'm sharing today are things you haven't already thought about extensively. So I just want to start by acknowledging the wisdom of everybody who's here today, and that we all bring our own experiences, you know, in these situations to the table. And I hope that, you know, at the end, you'll feel comfortable sharing or sharing in the breakout rooms. I think due to time, if it's okay with everybody, I'll probably save all the questions for the end, just so we can kind of get a flow going, since we'll be sort of interrupting for video clips throughout. So with that, I will start by wanting to acknowledge that we are currently on Ohlone land, and that there's a really root importance in always sort of thinking about where we are, where we're situated. You know, at this point in this world of COVID, when so many events, at least that I've been doing, have been on Zoom, you know, people may be coming from all different places, and the original inhabitants of the land that they're on, you know, may differ. But I grew up in Washington, D.C., and growing up, I don't think it was ever discussed. You know, there's been a complete invisibilization of Indigenous people in that space. And so coming out here, it's been really important to me to sort of recognize whose land this is, but not sort of as an empty recognition of just saying, oh, this is Ohlone land, we're done. But rather what comes with that is a respect for the fact that this is not previously Ohlone land, this is still Ohlone land, and there are still Ohlone people here. The last film I'll be showing you a clip from, if we get there, is the documentary we did about the founding of the Sogorea Land Trust, which is about Karina Gould and the local Ohlone community, but also responsibility, right? So I think all of us in our own way have a responsibility to recognize whose land this is, you know, knowing that many of our families didn't come here by choice. You know, people may have been brought, people's families and ancestors may have been brought here as slaves. My family all fled the Ukraine. Okay, so what's going on currently is actually feels a little bit personal and terrifying. Both sides of my family fled the Ukraine before World War II. And, you know, we're Jews who were being persecuted there and came here. And I think nonetheless, we came to somebody else's land. for me personally, the same could be said for Israel. That was somebody else's land. That was Palestinian land. And so I think just knowing the history of the spaces that you're in and orienting how you use your life and your time on this planet in a way that moves with that and respects it is quite important. So without further ado, a little bit about my background. So I'll get into kind of detail on some of these areas later, but yeah, I was born and raised in Washington, DC. My undergrad degree was in cultural anthropology. Then I moved out to the Bay Area in 1995 and started working with the day labor program in San Francisco and teaching ESL courses, organizing within the day labor community around 2000, as well as sort of concurrently doing media literacy. I helped co-found what was called the Independent Media Center, which was a response to the globalization protests up in Seattle, and really an opportunity for us to say, hey, we're not going to let the mainstream media make all of our narratives for us. I started, when I moved to Oakland in 2002, I got to know Street Level Health Project. They were just starting as a clinic that's kind of a safety net of a safety net. So a lot of the larger community clinics like Clínica de la Raza or Native American Health Center have a certain layer of bureaucracy in which people need to have insurance before getting in. And so we're, you know, as I'll explain further in a minute, we're really a barrier-free setting. And that really appealed to me, just the idea of healthcare as a right, and a right that's not complicated to access. And so I started initially teaching ESL classes and organizing sort of a volunteer collective to run ESL classes there. I then taught ESL for Oakland Unified School District for some years with adult education, and then segued over to start getting into healthcare. In part because I noticed that so many of the traditions and the natural medicine that people often, you know, because of who I was in contact with, immigrants, had access to in the countries that they're from, were suddenly less available here. You know, if you live in the Bay Area and you have money and you have English language skills and you have transportation, then sure, it's actually kind of a mecca for integrative medicine. But if that's not the case, and you live in East Oakland and you just arrived here and you don't have any resources, then it really occurred to me that there was a place for going back to street level where I had been previously, and where they were only at that point doing, you know, Western medicine with a doctor and nurses, and saying, what would it look like, you know, if I went back to school, got the training, and we really brought in integrative health resources that felt more culturally relevant to people in combination, in conjunction. So I went back, I got my master's in nutrition. I actually started by studying herbs. So I studied Western herbalism for 3 years, and then decided that I should put some letters after my name if I was going to do community healthcare work for funding purposes. So I got my master's in nutrition. And so I started doing the nutrition herbal medicine program at street level in 2009. And then a couple years into that, I was involved with the occupation of Segurate up in Vallejo, which was Native Ohlone land. And through that, really got to know a little more about the Native community here. And from there, kind of revisited some of the media work that I had done, recognizing that, that there wasn't enough information out there about some of this. So began doing some film work with the Native community. And that kind of turned into underexposed films. And then the other logo you see on there is Integrative Medicine for the Underserved. It's an organization, it's a national organization started by doctors, but to really bring together teams of all different kinds of healthcare practitioners who work in underserved communities, who are from underserved communities, to really create shared resources and dialogue about how this type of programming can become more accessible nationwide. So I served on the board of that for about 4 years. Yeah, so that's a little bit, or a lot maybe, about me. So I want to start by looking at, you know, defining some of these terms, because we don't ever want to take sort of terminology for granted. So if you read what you're seeing, actually, does somebody want to read it for us? Any volunteers? Don't be shy. Come on.
Anybody?
I can read it.
Okay, go ahead.
My name is Shabnam, by the way. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you for volunteering.
Of course. So do you want me to start from the title or just the
Sure, wherever you want to start is good.
Okay, so what is culturally responsive integrative community healthcare? The traditional notion of competence in clinical training as a detached mastery of a theoretically finite body of knowledge may not be appropriate for this area of physician education. Cultural humility is proposed as a more suitable goal in multicultural medical education. Cultural humility incorporates a lifelong commitment to self-evaluation and self-critic, to redressing the power imbalances in the patient-physician dynamic, and to developing mutually beneficial and non-paternalistic clinical and advocacy partnership with communities on behalf of individuals and defined populations. And that's by Melanie Tervelin and Jan Marie Garcia.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So that was research that came out in 1998, and they're actually Bay Area based. And it was really looking at how we think about the concepts of what previously had been defined as cultural competency. And, I think that's a really self-limiting term because it assumes that there's a finite point, right, that any of us could reach where we've worked it all out and we're competent in working cross-culturally and that there's nothing more, to learn. And I think this was really combating that in a lot of ways and saying that it's a fluid process, it's a lifelong learning process, and that we have to have the humility to, to learn from our mistakes and to learn from our patients, to learn from our colleagues, to learn from, what we see in the world and constantly keep that dynamic there. So I think for me, at least, that quote sort of summarizes cultural humility quite well, which is really for me an important concept in how I move through the world, particularly as a person with, a significant amount of privilege in this country. And so does anybody want to share a very quick idea on this or expanding on this before we go on? Okay, I'm going to move on then. Okay, so a couple of concepts and ways of thinking about this when you're actually working in a clinical setting. And I know that for some of you that this isn't necessarily relevant because you're not going to be clinicians, you're not going to be working with patients, but this is really ideas that can be applied to any walk of life and to any work that you're doing. And so, these are some things that a lot of my colleagues and I at Integrative Medicine for the Underserved kind of thought about. And as you can see on there, the second study is something we actually published, really primarily to look at how community health workers and people who are working, in their own communities, but often don't get the respect that they deserve, what it would look like to really fully have them be respected members of teams, not just seen as sort of accessories for interpretation or, and not to say that interpretation isn't hugely important, but when I'm working with our mom interpreter, so mom is Indigenous Guatemalan language, she's offering so much more than just language. She's helping me to make the concepts that I'm talking about with patients around food or how people think about their body, to make that accessible. And that's a huge role, right? And so for me, I feel very strongly about the idea of horizontal, non-hierarchical, team-based care, where the doctor, the nurse, the nutritionist, the herbalist, the community health worker, the therapist, everybody's equal, including the patient, and so the patient's own ideas about their body are central to how we sort of hear and move forward. So we wrote that piece about that. I think it's free license online, so you can access it. There's also a couple of other articles. The bottom one is about the other clinic that's featured in the documentary that I'll show you a clip for in a little bit. So the documentary had a film on the East Coast and the West Coast. And so this is from a clinic in Massachusetts that was started to work with Cambodian refugees. And so they printed out in 2010 a study about their model of work. But so going back to the top though, culturally responsive versus culturally rooted. Does anybody have an idea about how these two concepts might differ? For me, they're both equally important and equally valid, but they do come from slightly different places. Oh my God, I wish I could like give away prizes to get you guys to talk. But I can't, so.
I'll take I think it's culturally responsive would be responding to other people's cultural background and identity, where culturally rooted is it's rooted from within that culture. So
Wonderful. Thank you, first of all, for stepping up. And second of all, for nailing it right on the head. That's exactly it, right? So it's those two concepts kind of depend on who's the practitioner, who's the patient, what's the setting, right? So for me, I always, am mindful of the fact that I'm trying to work culturally responsively. As an herbalist, as a Western herbalist, I'm not a curandera, right? And so if my, for instance, Mexican patients are familiar with curanderas from their experience, that's not what I am. And that's not ever what I'm pretending to be. I have my own tradition of herbalism that I learned in, but I'm trying to be culturally responsive to using plants or using approaches that feel familiar to my patients. And so I'm learning from them and they're learning from me. Meanwhile, culturally rooted, which I think is, even more ideal when it's possible, would be when we bring in healthcare providers who are working within their own communities and offering, whether it's herbalism or other practices that are familiar to people because they share that particular background and that particular tradition and experience. And actually, so to touch upon something Ken asked me before we started, I think the question of cultural appropriation or cultural misappropriation really comes in here. For many years, I've kind of been a person who rants a lot against cultural appropriation, which is really kind of the process by which we sort of pick and choose and take things that might interest us from other people's cultures and then turn them into our own and put our own spin on them and take them out of context and, often in our capitalist society, profit off of them. And to me, that's profoundly problematic, particularly in healing traditions that are part of a larger system of understanding, of belief. But lately, I feel like sort of looking at the fluid process by which cultures overlap, I think I have sort of through talking to colleagues, come to feel like cultural misappropriation is probably the more appropriate term for what I just described, because in a sense, we're always culturally appropriating in this modern world. And I think, that happens in both directions. And it absolutely has a power dynamic, but there are times when it has to be seen as cultural appropriation, but it might not be bad or it might not be negative. And so I think sort of this idea that I started with of sort of picking and choosing and taking, I think I tend to these days maybe refer to that more as cultural misappropriation. In recognition mostly of the fact that in 2022, our cultures aren't isolated, right? They're very often interacting with each other. So maybe there is some fluidity, but at the same time, it is absolutely vital that we stay vigilant about making sure that that fluidity is not disrespectful, is not changing significance, is not capitalizing off of something.
Thank you, Michelle. That was very articulate. I appreciate you.
Thanks. Yeah, I hope.
Sharing with us. It's often a topic of interest and passionate interest, and how to articulate this very clearly, and you did. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for giving me the opportunity, because it's definitely sort of an area of thought and an area of study that has been central to a lot of my thinking. So I'm going to launch into a little better description of Street Level Health Project, kind of as a whole, and then I'll talk a little bit about my program. And I'm just like hoping that we're on schedule here, because I'm not doing a very good job of checking.
We're doing pretty good. So we're pretty good.
Okay. So Street Level Health Project, Proyecto de Salud para Todos. Anybody want to read the mission statement? Otherwise, I think, you can all read it to yourselves. But essentially, kind of to summarize, so we started in 2002. So this year is our 20-year anniversary. I had the profound honor of getting to know the organization 20 years ago when I first moved to Oakland and started doing ESL there. And, you know, their vision, the founders, was really just to create a space for accessible healthcare, particularly initially that outreach to jornaleros, or day laborers, people who, you know, were working in the street and frequently didn't have access to resources. We've expanded considerably since then. So I'll talk, yeah. So who we serve is sort of primarily recent immigrants, day laborers, people who are uninsured or underinsured. So, you know, even people who have been in this country for a long time, but don't, for whatever reason, have access or haven't established care. Low-wage workers. We work somewhat often with unhoused community. So I would say probably maybe about 15% of my patients are unhoused. That's changed a little bit during the pandemic. And if I don't do so sort of naturally in the flow, a thing to ask me about later would be how have some of these things shifted with the pandemic? Because for instance, we were really based on being a community drop-in center. So we didn't take appointments, you just show up. People knew when our free clinic was 2 days a week. 3 days a week, we had community lunches. And so it was very, very accessible. And if you were unhoused and maybe didn't have a telephone, you could still get a hold of us. The problem is now with the pandemic, we had such a small space with such poor ventilation that we've continued to do all of our patient visits by phone. And I would say that in some ways that probably has, you know, I've seen a few unhoused members of our community, but it's made things much more challenging to have to do it in that circumstance. And then low literacy. So I think we often don't think about what a barrier literacy can be to receiving healthcare. But again, sort of trying to break those down, people find often that it's more comfortable to come to us. Okay. So I'm imagining that you guys are all familiar with this, but you know, many communities have active barriers to healthcare. And so for our community, these are some of the main ones: economic barriers, structural or political barriers. So if you're undocumented, if you lack insurance, cultural barriers, so language or the type of care that's being offered not resonating with you, sort of very tangible structural barriers such as transportation or childcare, you know, and not being able to take care of yourself because there's these other members of your family who are dependent on you. Fear, intimidation, and discomfort. If people come from a culture where they have a very different experience of healthcare, maybe they're afraid to see a doctor. Skills barriers can make it sometimes hard to navigate what, you know, that you're being referred to do if you need to pick up a prescription or do certain things, fill out paperwork. And then self-advocacy barriers, which I think is really important because the relationship that we want to have with our clients is not, let me just do all this stuff for you, but it's rather, let me introduce you to how to do these things effectively. And let me support you for as long as there's a language barrier, but let me also, you know, support you in developing your own ability to advocate for yourself. So our programs, this has shifted slightly with the pandemic, but so I'm part of our health access program, and I'll talk a little bit more at length about that in a bit. Wellness and prevention covers kind of various levels of support around getting health insurance. So we are really grateful in Alameda County that even our undocumented community members can get access to what's called Health Pack, which is like a limited scope Medi-Cal, so that we can help them, you know, get into a permanent place of care. So we kind of see ourselves as the safety net of the safety net, as kind of a place that people can show up when they first need to figure out how to navigate what they need. And then what we're hoping is that we can get you some sort of insurance so that we can get you into a larger, much better resourced clinical environment. So I have colleagues who help with establishing insurance for people. We have a food program. And again, that has changed. It used to involve community lunches, which were great because they did more than just give food. They brought people together to share experiences, to feel supported. But at this point, it is exclusively food bags that we offer every week. Then community building, again, that has kind of shifted. We used to have more community events. We're still doing that. We did one outdoors a few months ago where we gave away jackets and a bunch of other resources to day laborers. But you know, that again, COVID has just impacted so many of us working in the community in this way. And then immigrant rights and empowerment. So we have a day labor collective, which is an extremely important part of the work we do. It's a collective of workers who make autonomous self-group led decisions about how to advocate for themselves. So, you know, we have a workers program where we take jobs and then can put people, you know, you need somebody to help moving, let us send this person. And so, you know, the workers collective decides how much are we charging, you know, what is a fair way to pass around the jobs. So really self-led, and then also working together to decide which, you know, should we show up at May Day and should we, you know, represent street level at this action or that. So also, you know, on an advocacy and policy level. We have also, like so many places, gotten a tremendous amount of funding for COVID. So we've been doing vaccination clinics in conjunction with Alameda County. We've been, you know, we have a street team that exists anyway to do outreach to laborers. And so they've been much more active, you know, going around with materials, with information. Yeah, so I'm going to bounce back to our health access team, which is the part that I do. And I really want to start by saying, like, it is an incredible privilege to work as a healthcare provider at a place where all these things are happening at once under one roof. It makes it so much easier for my patients to get all the different types of things they need. You know, if I have a patient who needs help with wage theft from his employer, my colleagues can send them to resources that, you know, Centro Legal or places that can support. So it's kind of this situation where, you know, the social determinants of health are the determinants of our programming, and the community's voice around what its needs are the determinants of our programming. And that's, you know, that's an amazing thing as a nutritionist to say, I have to be very mindful, right, of how I talk about food in an environment where people are food insecure, but to be able to say, hey, I can send you to my colleague who can get you set up on our weekly food bags and work with some other community organizations that we work with to get you food deliveries. Like, it makes my job possible in many ways. So just acknowledging the hard work that all of my colleagues, many of them from the community that they're working with, are doing. So when I started, my program is called Consultas Naturalistas, and it's one part of our health access program. So the rest of our health access program, my team, is our medical director, who's an MD, 2 therapists, one of whom sort of defines herself as a psychologist, the other whom defines himself as a traditional practitioner. So he works sort of in a more spiritual way with his patients. And then myself doing nutrition, herbs, and I really work with my patients in 4 areas, kind of looking at diet, exercise, sleep improvement, and stress reduction. And then providing herbs and supplements and vitamins for free, you know, to support their lifestyle changes. So all of us are a team, and then our clinic coordinator and but maybe most importantly, my comadre, because her son is my godson, our community health worker, Maria Vicente. So she is Guatemalan mom. Mom is one of the Mayan communities in Guatemala. There are 35 different Mayan languages spoken in Guatemala. And I think one bias that we see frequently is that people assume that everybody coming here from the South speaks Spanish, when actually we see many monolingual mom patients. And so having the privilege of working with Mari, learning so much about her culture, learning about how to translate the work we're doing, not just the language, but the style, into something that's accessible for people is super important. So when I finished herb school, a lot of people I knew were like talking about, oh, I want to start clinic or this or that. And it just, reinventing the wheel didn't appeal to me, because I feel like just deciding that you have a great idea and that's what you want to do for the community is not a really useful attitude. I think that the way we should be engaging community is looking at who are existing organizations that have trust. What is it that, you know, whatever community members we're talking about have expressed an interest in, have expressed a need for? And, you know, how do we as individuals who have certain talents or skills tie into that? And how is that something that we can help improve, you know, or bring to the table, as opposed to saying, oh, I have this great idea, I'm going to start this thing. So I think just having the humility to say that there's already people doing amazing work out there. And the point is just to figure out, what does collaboration look like? So I started individual consultations in 2009. There was a time when, at the beginning, people didn't really understand what I was doing. Like, our doctor at that time was pretty closed to the idea of herbal medicine, supplements, honestly, even the importance of nutrition. And he has since retired, but I do feel like we all grew in the first couple of years of trying to figure out, you know, how to understand each other's work, how to collaborate more. But fortunately, right now, our team is amazing, just with such a profound respect for everybody in it. There was a time when I did some groups, and I think there is a real benefit sometimes when you can, to doing like we had a group on food for people who had diabetes. The only problem in our setting is that our patients' lives can be very unpredictable. And so scheduling sort of a weekly group definitely sort of grew out of favor, and it just wasn't something that people were able to do. There was a time after that when I tried to adapt it to just doing groups in the waiting room when people were there to see the doctor. So we did that for a while, but that sort of phased out. And I think as our team became more integrative, it just became easier to do individual patient visits and what we call warm handoffs, where if I'm saying, oh, you're stressed out and you want to talk to me about that, and I can give you these herbs and I can talk to you about, you know, your breathing and the importance of exercise and being in nature, I can also bring you down the hall to my colleague who's a therapist and can talk to you about some of the major traumas that you're dealing with. So really that kind of warm handoff, again, was something that I just loved about our organization. We still have that, you know, I'm still doing handoffs, but they're handoffs by phone. It's very different, where it's sort of like I speak with you and then I say, okay, I'm going to put in a request for our therapist. And that happens a week or two later. So again, another sort of COVID related change. Okay, I actually think I am starting to fall behind, so I'm just going to run through this very quickly. The most common reasons why I tend to see patients are people dealing with diabetes, digestive issues, insomnia, anxiety, depression, chronic pain, hypertension. COVID has definitely obviously become a top choice. Colds and flus, allergies, headaches, UTIs, arthritis, women's hormonal issues, and then of course like general nutrition questions. So this part, I feel like, you know, especially for any of you who might be thinking of walking down a road similar to mine, I feel like my approach I describe as culturally responsive harm reduction nutrition, because it really holds the idea that people are going to do the best they can, and that my patients aren't going to go buy fancy food at Whole Foods. My patients may be depending on the food bank if they're even getting enough food at all. And so some of the choices that people have are greatly reduced. And then on top of that, it's critical that I know the traditional nutritional approaches of the communities I'm working with. And, you know, I don't think I went into this, I'm sorry, I skipped it on one of our slides, but while the majority of our patients are from either Mexico or Guatemala, you know, and I would say at this point, probably 30% are mom speakers. we still have, much more diversity than that. When we were in the clinic right prior to COVID, I would say the two other large populations we would see were Eritrean, Tigrinya speaking people, and from Nepal. And so it's critical that I know what people are eating, because my job is not to tell you that you should eat all these new things you've never heard of. My job is to work with a diet that feels most traditional to you and figure out, the right kind of balance of foods within that picture. And really also just acknowledging that what I see is that many illnesses develop when people come to the US, right? So maybe people were eating a lot more healthy traditionally when they were using their ancestors' diets, when they were using their traditional foods, and then your life is disrupted and you come here and suddenly you're faced with the standard American diet. And not just the food, but also sort of our fast pace of life, so that people aren't taking the time to cook, they're not taking the time to sort of relax as they eat. So really factoring all these things into account. So I'm looking at sort of a whole foods, not the store, approach to addressing macronutrient balance, where I'm looking at using as few processed foods as possible. And for as much as people can sort of do a plate of 50% non-starchy vegetables, whole grains, root veggies, a lean protein, I really try to elicit the client telling me, like, how did your diet change when you came here? Or what foods feel familiar to you? Then again, addressing situations of limited access. So knowing local resources, knowing how to make choices on a budget. And then really when working around change and dietary change, looking at sort of practical relevant food substitutions, avocado instead of cheese, plain yogurt instead of sour cream, fizzy water with lemon instead of soda. So kind of thinking of things on that level. Okay. And then this isn't so much represented in the slides, but I work with patients also around exercise and just making sure that they're getting physical activity. Also talking about the benefits of when that physical activity can be in nature and sort of the additional peace of mind that can bring. But then I'm asking them sort of how much sleep do they get on an average night, and working around sleep hygiene and ways to make sure they're getting, 7 to 8 hours. More if it's possible. And then really trying to identify what their level of stress is and where those stressors are coming from. And so I bring herbs and supplements into the room at that point. I have always, since my program started, supplied my patients with free herbs and supplements. In the context I'm working in, it's not worth mentioning something if you can't supply it. Though more and more I do occasionally see patients who have some resources, in which case I'm looking at, trying to help them get things as cheaply as possible if they don't need us to supply it. But with herbs, I use herb teas. I'm always kind of thinking about, is this relevant to a patient's own lifestyle and limitations? So for instance, if I have a patient who has issues with alcohol, I will focus on teas. There's also often a cultural familiarity to teas. So I'll make blends, I have bulk herbs and I'll make blends. Tinctures are alcohol-based. They're extremely easy to use. So, and sometimes they are stronger. So, when that's an option, I will use those, sometimes powders. I use multivitamins frequently, just kind of as harm reduction, because a lot of our folks don't have adequate food access. Use a lot of vitamin D, and as you can sort of see, some of the other supplements, probiotics, flax seeds. So yes. And then I'm also, before I'm sort of crafting what I'm going to give someone, I'm also thinking about, and talking to them about, are there herbs that they're familiar with, and nopales, which are a traditional Mexican food, are wonderful they're great for pre-diabetes. They help with sugar control. They are something that people are most of the time very excited to either have in their diet already or bring into their diet. Canela or cinnamon, and ajo, garlic. There's also ginger, turmeric. I'm not going to go into too much detail since this isn't really an herb class, but feel free to ask me questions. And again, sort of here, when I'm working with stress, anxiety, depression, I have maybe some more unfamiliar herbs that maybe are heavier hitters for some of those things. Chamomile is wonderful, manzanilla, but it's not always sort of the strongest thing if I'm trying to deal with some of these issues. Yeah, so now we're gonna shift gears because I feel like I've been running my mouth for a while. So as a filmmaker, it's been sort of an evolution. Our first film, which I'll briefly maybe touch on later, was the one I mentioned, Beyond Recognition, which is about the founding of the Sogorea Land Trust. Not explicitly about health, but for me, many ways it ties in because our relationship to the land, our relationship to Indigenous people of the land, it all relates to what is a healthy balance. So we might look at that trailer at the end, but right now, so that film was a half hour and is on national public television. I'm kind of a film nerd, so it was a really big deal to me that the Pacific Film Archive also bought that film. The newest film that we did is a feature-length film. It's called A Place to Breathe. And as you can see, it's on immigrant and refugee experiences in the healthcare system, focusing on culturally responsive healing. I would just say that it's completely inspired by my colleagues and my patients. So, I mean, I'm not in the film at all. It was a very sort of deliberate decision because I wanted to focus on the aspects of the work that were being done by people in their own communities. And so the film sort of juxtaposes the experience of colleagues and patients of mine from Mexico, Guatemala, and Uruguay out here with the experiences of providers and patients from Cambodia and Democratic Republic of Congo at the clinic on the East Coast. So without further ado, I'm going to show you the trailer if I have the tech savvy to do so. Let's see. Okay. Give me 1 second. Maybe everybody can stretch for a moment. Just want to make sure I can bring this up in a viewable way.
You need any help? I'm standing by, Michelle.
Okay, the biggest help would be that I think I'm ready to go, and it would be helpful if you can just, I'll assume it's good, but if for some reason there's pixelation or the way it's running or the sound, if there's any issue, just loudly tell me that.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, here we go, fingers crossed. Okay, are you guys seeing a black screen?
Yes.
Perfect, let's go.
Soy de Todos Santos, Guatemala. La vida de nosotros no era tan fácil. Gente que nos querían hacer daño, gente que quería violarme. Yo vi cómo mataron a la gente. Yo no quise estar allí, por eso huí de Guatemala.
Last semester was my first semester in nursing school. A lot of immigrants end up in that hospital. I could really see their struggle. I had a different level of understanding. If somebody tells you, I'm scared, my family's being separated, I haven't seen my sister in years, and you're sitting there like, yes, me either. I'm just wondering about what the relationship is between serving people and being in community with people.
Most of the patients that we see are refugees from any part of the world. We have the services that no other place has. We provide Western medicine with cultural competency and traditional healing like acupuncture, massage therapy, and cupping. Treat people the way they want to be treated It's not treat people the way we want to be treated.
Mimi nawazia vile juu tulikuwa nawazia wakati ya kifo ya.
When we arrived here, I felt I was safe because I couldn't hear the gunshots anymore.
Yeah.
The kids worry a lot, and I noticed that. So now I avoid being quiet when they're with me.
She was strong enough to help us get out of Uganda to the United States. Me as a son, it was really hurting me, seeing her doing all that and I couldn't do anything.
Having the experience of being a refugee and wanting to work with refugees, that's an amazing thing.
I want to be a social worker because I've seen a lot of people suffer. Seeing that as a kid, that stayed with you for a long time, and it's hard to turn the page.
We may come from different country, but the struggle and the challenge may be somehow similar to us. By helping people also help us as well, and to find the healing.
Michelle, can we help you with anything else?
Oh, I just have been talking and you wouldn't know that because my everything is off. I'm so sorry. Okay, let me restart the video. Hello. Yeah, I was just actually saying I haven't been monitoring the chat at all. So I am quickly seeing that people posted things. And Claudia, thank you for sharing that about your dad. Jennifer, totally agreed as far as sort of unauthorized appropriation or what I've been calling misappropriation. Chris, thank you about the trailer. The film is also now on national public television. So actually for World Health Day, which is a WHO sort of called for day on April 7th, I know they're showing it on both, I think KQED Plus and on the San Jose PBS station, both of which might be accessible online. So yeah, okay, I'm gonna try to sort of get us back on track with my slides because it will keep me focused. I'm gonna screen share again. And thank you for your patience through all the tech. Okay, so are you guys seeing my slides again?
Yes.
Perfect. So why film, right? It seems a little bit of a non sequitur with the healthcare, but like many of you, I feel like there's kind of always been multiple threads running through my life, and those threads allow me, hopefully, ideally, to impact things in different ways. They allow me to feel whole because they touch on different parts of myself. So as I became a healthcare provider, as the meaningfulness of what I was learning from my patients, from my colleagues, you know, and hopefully vice versa evolved, I realized that some of the media work that I had done earlier that I had kind of set aside had allowed me to speak to things on a larger overarching scale that I feel like, you know, wasn't necessarily happening. And so I feel so incredibly blessed to sort of have 3 clinic days. And then my other days, I get to work on my own media projects. And I feel like they complement each other because I don't think I ever could have made this film, or I don't think I would like what this film was if it didn't come from all the experiences that I had the privilege of seeing in my patients and my colleagues. So I guess I feel very strongly that storytelling has the power to build empathy in a way that other types of information passage doesn't necessarily. I think it has the ability to connect people in community. A critique I have of sort of Western documentary is that in the past 10 years or maybe more, there's really been a push to tell individual stories, to create a space for sort of the heroic, triumphant individual. And at least in the communities that I work in, there's not a place for that, because there's a sense of modesty and humility about the work that people are doing, where the people that I initially maybe thought of as protagonists in the stories didn't want their stories told that way. And it involved many people and many pieces and many experiences. So really listening to that, which certainly made it harder to get funding along the way, because that's not what funders want to hear. But to me, I wouldn't be true to the stories I was telling if it wasn't approached that way. Importance of representation. So all of us really need to own our own media, but particularly the idea of who are we seeing on media? You know, and in my case, as a white person in this country, I am working cross-culturally, and I have to be, if I have the privilege of access to some of these tools, then I need to use them in a way that gives power to people who are sharing their stories. It's not my story to take and profit off of, which unfortunately I also see happening sometimes in documentary. So for me, it's really about like, how is that collaboration possible? So I think for me, part of it is always focusing on depicting the power and resilience of the people that I'm working with, how people transcend traumatic circumstances, absolutely acknowledging traumatic circumstances, because that kind of horror is true and it's real. But I see so many people who have brilliant resilience and survival skills, and I see so little of our mainstream media focusing on that. So really not creating people as victims. Maybe they are victims in one moment, as you'll see sort of in a clip I'm about to show you, but the point is that people can evolve into being their own saviors, you know, and that we're not trying to create a narrative that tells otherwise. Again, sort of recognizing my own privilege and power as a filmmaker, and making sure that the way that I move preserves people's own ownership of their stories, including, for me, ultimate editorial control. You know, that's something that people do not like to talk about. It makes many media makers quite uncomfortable. But I believe that if someone has chosen to let me share their story, if they then decide that there's pieces of it they don't want included, it is my responsibility to respect that. And then some techniques just to think about in the piece that you're about to watch. There's many parts where we did not translate or subtitle the mom language, or I think, as you may have just saw, the Swahili. The reason for that is because I wanted people to experience, there's so much you hear from the person across from you as a healthcare provider. And many of those cues are visual, and many of them are not language-based. And it's important to be able to listen even when you don't know the words, the tone, the expression. That's part of the job, is being present for all of that. And then you have the benefit, you know, of an amazing interpreter who is there to also tell you what those words meant. So I wanted to give the viewer the opportunity to feel both of those things and experience both of those things. And then you will see a little bit more of the animation. So animation was really an important approach for us to create a separate space for people's memories of home, for traumatic memory, kind of outside of the timeline of the verite film parts we're showing. We also didn't want people to have to be on camera while describing some of their most painful experiences. It also allowed for the use of metaphor, which I think can be more powerful sometimes when we're speaking on that level. So to do it, we had Berkeley Film Foundation gave us kind of a last minute grant, which enabled us to partner with 2 amazing female animators who were based actually in Europe. And we just created sort of a team working with the individuals and families to kind of keep bringing storyboards back to them, to keep making sure that the way it was being told felt real to them, to make sure the colors lined up with their memories, to make sure our amazing we have sound guy, Elton Bradman, who did both the soundscapes and a lot of the music to make sure that felt like it was in line with people's experiences. And then kind of the idea of using culturally relevant imagery, color, sound, that was both kind of universal in some ways because there were multiple animators working at the same time, but also, so we wanted there to be kind of a linear sense of the animation being part of the same sort of story world, but yet each animated section of the film has its own sort of images and color and sound that feel reflective of people's memories. So just some things to sort of just maybe allay that, like, the process has to be very deliberate and very conscious, and that's a big part of it. And I think all of the things that make you, all of your experiences, I mean, I know for me, I think being able to do both film and healthcare allow me to bring understandings into each of those worlds that I would not have otherwise if I just did one of them. So I'm gonna share the next clip, which is 7 minutes. We are a little bit behind my schedule, so I'm gonna immediately, I think that Ken is gonna help me by putting you in breakout rooms afterwards. I'm gonna share the questions now, and because I don't think I can screen share when you guys are in breakout rooms. So after you see this clip, I want you to sort of, with 3 or 4 other people, kind of discuss your response to it, but then also go into it thinking about what are examples of culturally rooted or culturally responsive healthcare that you observe in it. So now I'm going to try to share that with you. Hold on one second. Stretch again, you know, if you need to. Okay, so screen share. Okay, are you seeing the black screen again? Mm-hmm. Great.
Que somos más discriminados los que somos.
This is going to start immediately with a short clip of an interview that kind of takes place in the scheme of the film right after what you saw earlier with Norma in the clinic.
Que somos más discriminados los que somos indígenas, que hablamos un idioma y que no hablamos el español, mucho menos el inglés.
Entonces, hoy queremos ver cómo está el tobillo, ¿sí? ¿Puedes sentir aquí?
Me duele.
Sí, ¿tiene dolor como ardor en la planta de los pies?
Creo que mis dedos han perdido la sensibilidad. No siento
Sí.
cuando los toco.
Y esta cosa es muy apretado también.
Ajá, sí, no se puede mover.
Sí, no, eso va a causar más dolor si él está molestando eso.
No hablo español. Tengo a mi hijo que es especial. No puedo prestar mucha atención a las llamadas.
So voy a escribir en la carta que está causando dolor a los nervios que activan los dedos de los pies. I'm writing a letter. We hope that they'll be able to understand the suffering that the ankle monitor is causing her and that they will remove it based on medical visit.
Salí a buscar ayuda, toqué puertas para ayudarme. Entonces, eso es lo mismo que yo le digo a mi comunidad. Si yo pude, usted también puede, y aquí estoy para ayudarlo.
¿Y cómo estás? ¿Cómo te has sentido?
Ya cumplí 2 años, comencé con el 3er año con esto en mi pie.
Ya, ¿cómo sientes que te ha afectado en tu vida traer ese aparato?
Sí, yo les he explicado a los del ISAP diciéndoles que esta máquina se calienta y me daña, no me siento bien, pero ella me dijo, oh, esa máquina es muy confortable para la gente. No puedo expresarlo y cuando regreso lo primero que hago es llorar y llorar y llorar.
Ya.
A veces siento que ya no puedo, que esta máquina me va a matar a mí.
Ya.
¿Sabes para qué es la zanahoria, Emily? Es buena para los ojos. Dicen que por eso los conejos no usan lente. Porque comen mucha zanahoria. Después de un día de trabajo muy duro, escuchando gente con trauma, a mí me gustaba caminar y regresar a mi casa. Ponía a escuchar alabanzas. Yo soy muy religiosa y eso me sentía mejor. Es muy difícil explicar a la gente qué es un psicólogo porque ellos no saben y nunca han tenido una cita. La situación en Guatemala está peor que cuando yo estaba. Yo tengo 17 años de llegar aquí. Toda mi familia está en Guatemala. Mis 3 hermanas, yo soy la más pequeña de la familia. Hay muchos idiomas diferentes en Guatemala. Una cultura muy grande, es el idioma mam. Es un idioma maya, todavía sigue la discriminación total. No te puedes sentar en ciertos lugares donde solo los ladinos se pueden sentar. No puedes entrar en un autobús que dice que solo para ladinos. No tienes voz ni voto. Yo tenía 7 años cuando pasó la guerra civil en el 81 y 82. Yo vi cómo los torturaban. Yo lo vi, mataron a mi maestro. Los soldados echaron gasolina a las casas. Desde ahí la gente salía corriendo. En el 2001 yo huí de Guatemala con mi hija. Fue muy fuerte mi viaje. Y si los mexicanos se daban cuenta que yo era guatemalteca, me iban a deportar ahí mismo. Y pasé con mi hija 4 días sin comer. Y llegamos a la frontera. Las personas que estaban en Tijuana se ofrecían a ayudarnos, pero yo tenía mucho miedo. Después de eso califiqué para el asilo. No fue tan fácil. Pasé en muchas depresiones. Yo empecé a superarlas ayudando a otras personas. La trauma es como una idea que está saliendo su espíritu de su cuerpo. La gente se cura tomando un té de ruda o soplar con agua de ruda, o también usan otra esencia que le llaman espíritu. les sirven específicamente para decir, estamos aquí, no te vayas, lo llama, esta persona como que regresa a su cuerpo. Eso es la forma en que ellos superan la trauma.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Would you be able to put everybody in groups now with the, let me show the question one more time.
Yes. Let's do that.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to share screen just to show you the question. And then Ken, you can kind of immediately transfer them over. So, you know, just checking in. I know I actually probably should have said, you know, I know that's kind of a painful clip to watch. So maybe checking in with each other about your responses, and then really discussing sort of what examples of culturally rooted or culturally responsive healthcare that you saw.
And how long do we have, Michelle?
Do you have a hard stop at 2:45?
No, it's all right. We can go as late as 3 if we need to.
Okay, yeah, this is actually a clinic day, so I don't think I can go later than 3, but yeah, why don't we do about 6 minutes, or
Okay.
let's say maybe 5 minutes in the groups, and then I'll kind of finish things off and we can do Q&A for the rest.
That sounds great. Okay, so opening the rooms now. Okay, Claudia, you'll need to join a group. Isabella, you'll need to join a group as well.
Okay, I was just in class, but I accidentally pressed the leave button instead of join the.
It's too easy to do.
Yeah.
I know. So do you remember which group you were in, or did you show up at all?
No, I accidentally left the meeting just before you were putting everyone into
Got
groups.
you. Okay, that's totally
Yeah.
cool. Let me just put you into groups then.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, so Galileo only has one person there. I think their partner left, so we'll put you in room 7 with Galilea.
Okay, perfect.
Okay,
Thank you.
you bet. Mhm. Mhm. So welcome back, everyone. Okay. Hello, Rick. So welcome, everyone. Everyone's back now. So Michelle, we're all yours. You're muted. You'll need to turn your mic on.
I am muted. Now I'm not, I hope. Okay, so I'm gonna try to, I'm just gonna show like 2 more slides very quickly and then turn it over to Q&A because we have very little time. Oh, so actually I am no longer, can I screen share? Yeah,
Let me make you a host again. Did that somehow shift? That's interesting.
I think I am.
No, you're good. Yeah.
Okay. So I was going to talk a little about some other film projects that I've done. Kind of, I worked with Mari, one of our mom interpreters, to make Spanish and mom language films about health during wildfire season for our patients, because a sort of awareness of sort of protection against smoke was not necessarily so high in the mom community. I worked with the Tom Waddell Urban Health Center and UCSF's Osher Center to sort of document their integrative pain management program. And then our prior documentary is the one I spoke about earlier about Beyond Recognition. I'm not, unfortunately, going to have time to show you the trailer right now, but if you go to, well, okay, so that's my contact info, but if you go to underexposedfilms.com, then there are trailers, and actually also the Tom Waddell film is on there, and information. So I'm going to call it at that. Thank you so much for giving me the space to sort of share all parts of myself. And thank you for your attention and your breakout room participation. And Ken, I'm going to turn it over to you for the questions.
Wonderful. Just how about an applause for Michelle and her great presentation, don't you think? Virtual and or actual.
Thank you.
Thank you for giving so much in such a short amount of time. You've covered a lot of territory. So questions from the audience. What are your thoughts, questions?
Hi, Michelle. So firstly, I just want to say how much I'm sure we all enjoyed your presentation. We've learned so much. And I just want to mention how amazing your work is. I did know I wanted to do something in the public health or holistic health field, but now after your presentation, I definitely, want to like look more into your path, because I love helping people. And I think you helping people, especially like, people that come to a new country and they don't know absolutely, like, for example, like language barriers and everything. I was just in a breakout room and I was telling everyone, I don't know if you guys heard about like the recent tragedies that's been happening in Afghanistan when the Taliban took over. We've had a lot of immigrants and new families come to my areas in the Bay Area. So I've actually volunteered and helped with a lot of the families. And after you showed the video, it reminded me so much and of how the families do struggle, because I saw them like firsthand. I spoke to them and I know their language, but they were telling me, they were saying it's so hard leaving a country after war and then coming to a different country and also not knowing anything about, like, for example, how to live, or even, like language, you need to, I mean, English is so important to know nowadays, because just even going out and asking for help, you need to, know the language to talk to people. So it definitely is a struggle, and it's definitely a struggle for people that, newly come to a different country. But I mean, I love your work and I love how much clinics are benefiting these people. So thank you so much. And I had a question. Do you guys plan on spreading or making more clinics like yours more available, especially after the pandemic?
Well, so first, thank you for the work that you've been doing with the folks who are coming as refugees in your community. I think it's a really good point that you make, that just so often, and I guess it says this in the trailer, people assume that once you've gotten asylum or once you've gotten to somewhere that's technically safe, that, that you're fine and that you're just going to be able to move on with everything. And actually, that's really just the beginning in certain ways. And so, having these resources available in a culturally responsive way, the fact that you know the language of the people that you're working with, and if you share a culture, that's wonderful. To answer the question, so our clinic is a really small kind of safety net situation. I think we sort of struggle just to expand and be able to do what we need to do in our own community. And I think that does speak to why I was on the board of integrative medicine for the underserved, or why I do a lot of presentations at conferences and things like that. I want to support, and I feel that my colleagues probably feel similarly, I want to support other people creating the resources they need in their area, and using these models. We're certainly not the only one, so I don't want to imply that we are. And I think that really it's not for us to kind of expand, but rather for people in a given community to identify how it could look in their community. So I think it's more about kind of trying to support people at the capacities they have, maybe not reinventing the wheel if there are some lessons that we've all learned. But not necessarily for us to expand, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Just while we're touching on this, and then I know Emily has a question as well in just a minute. Do you accept volunteers at the Street Level Health Project? And can someone, any thoughts about someone like Shabnam actually making this her mission to prepare for such, to be a community organizer, or any thoughts in that direction?
So historically, we depend really heavily on volunteers. We do have a medical director, but when we were in clinic in person, whoever was our Western medicine provider on a given day was usually a volunteer. So volunteer doctors, volunteer nurse practitioners. And then for folks who are not trained providers, we definitely have all different kinds of volunteers, helping with our mutual aid program, helping with our food bags. And it is possible that they may be looking for folks right now. Everything is different with the pandemic. So essentially, the site where we were operates with closed doors, and all sort of interaction with the community is outside in terms of like having a line for food bags. But I would suggest, so I'm not sure if I had it, but the website for, if you specifically are interested in volunteering in some way, street level, our website is streetlevelhealthproject.org. I'm going to put it in the chat. And there will be contact information on there, because I'm not the person who sort of coordinates that, but there will be contact information. Opportunities are definitely more limited right now because they really are trying to narrow who comes in and out, but that hopefully will not be that way forever. And I think there probably still are ways to get involved currently. As far as the larger question, I think in life, you're never really trying to emulate someone else's path. You're trying to figure out how their path can inspire you to use the energy and values that you appreciate about it and make it your own, So I think that, I know for me, if I were to just give you the whole life story of how I got to this point, it was a journey and it was a figuring out, and I think questions that have guided me along the way are sort of, how can I be most useful? How can I be most relevant? How can I address this in a way that has maximum respect for everybody involved, And I think, really formulating for yourself based on, not just me, but all the people and projects that you've encountered that inspire you, sort of turning those into questions for yourself that you can then answer, because I'm sure that you have a specific set of skills that I probably don't, and that you can bring. I will say maybe briefly, back in my late 20s and 30s, I'm in my 40s now. I was definitely more out in the streets, more going to demonstrations, more involved in kind of trying to create social change in that way. And when I identified for myself, hey, you know what? I have unique gifts in the realm of healthcare provision, sort of using the background I had in cultural anthropology, or I have gifts that I really want to explore, whether they're unique or not, in filmmaking. I sort of was able to give myself 2 tools towards really maximizing my impact. And so I think that that's something, is that maybe at I'm not sure sort of ages of people in the room, but maybe more when you're in your 20s, you're kind of figuring out what things resonate the most, and maybe just being involved as much as possible in as many areas as possible, and having that determine for you what feels like most you and what feels like it could develop into a very specific set of skills that you bring to this world.
Thank you. Wonderful answer. Emily, you have a question?
I want to say thank you too. Your presentation was amazing. Because it was so amazing, I'm wondering if there's any way you can like share your slides by chance, because they were super informational. Like I loved like the herb slides and everything. Like I want to refer back to that and try all of that. Super interesting.
If you could send me those, Michelle, I'd be glad to post them for everyone.
Absolutely. Yeah, I will send you a copy of the slides. And what you'll notice is that the slide, it'll sort of end. There'll be like a closure slide that has my contact info, but I'm going to include two or three more about herbs after that from another presentation, just in case it's of interest.
Yes, please. Thank you so much.
Of course.
That's great.
Thank you for your attention.
Someone else, question, thought?
I have time for one more. I do have.
Oh, that's right. You have to go soon. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Last question.
Our clinic day.
Last golden opportunity.
I have one. Michelle, what would you ask us as an audience?
Oh.
What would I ask you as an audience? But that has so many different contexts.
All right.
Do you mean like what would I ask you as far as how to engage the world, or?
Yeah, or how to embrace some of the context and the process that you presented today.
So I would ask you to first start sort of, even though I'm sure that there are absolutely those among us who have done this, really reflecting on what cultural humility means to you and sort of the ways that, because again, I make mistakes all the time. It's a lifelong learning process, right? So I never assume that I've figured everything out. So I think even those of us like you and Ken and Jennifer who've spent years working in this field, I think there's always ways that we can evolve our engagement with the world around us, right? So I think first, seeing, hey, this is where I'm at now. I'm pretty happy about these things I've accomplished or these ways that I've grown or learned, but what are things I can expand upon? What are ways I could have made that interaction with that student or for students? What are ways I could have made that interaction with my co-students or friends or teachers sort of function better when it happens cross-culturally? And then sort of going back to my elephant in the room, which is really, I look at what's happening in Ukraine and it brings up so many things for me around, while we all hate war, sort of what do we support in the face of like tyrannical imperialism? And how do we make sure that if Ukraine doesn't feel close to us or it's not our struggle, that we're still cognizant of, the amplification of refugees in the world that's about to happen. And then I think I'm going to end on this note, at the same time asking ourselves difficult questions about the racism that's happening in Europe right now. Because I know for me, even all of my family being from the Ukraine and being discriminated against when we were in the Ukraine, I've spent a fair amount of time in Eastern Europe, and I'm horrified, but not surprised by these stories we're hearing about African and Indian natives citizens trying to cross the border and being discriminated against. Yet we look at the narratives. I mean, if we think of media criticism, we look at the narratives of how the crisis in Afghanistan that was brought up, or in Syria, how Europe and the US responded to those, and just the difference of how those narratives take place if people are white or, and so to me, I would say this is a really painful moment in the world, a really intense moment, and try to engage it, try to engage it and not just shut down if you can.
Well, thank you for being with us, Michelle, and for giving so much energy and focus to today's topic.
It was a pleasure, really. I really appreciate the opportunity. I hope that everyone enjoyed it, and I would like to learn more about what else you're doing in this class at some point.
Anytime.
Take good care.
Okay, bye, thank you. Well, thanks those of you who joined us for today. It was nice to have you with us as well. We're about to turn our attention back to the class structure itself and have a few minutes alone. So just to dialogue about this and also our next set of classes. So thank you all for visiting. We hope to see you in future weeks. We'll be sending out word about speakers from here on as well. Thank you.
Hey, Ken.
Yes, Jen, yeah.
I have the link to the survey again, if
Yes, you know, I've been moving this last week. It's been crazy. So I failed to copy that down when I had it
yeah,
last.
I'm putting it in the chat right now.
That's perfect.
So yeah, so it would be great if people could take a moment to give their feedback about the speaker. We'd love to hear. Thank you.
That's very helpful. So everyone have that. Let's take a moment and do that, if you will. Notice the Qualtrics quote, and let's give 5 minutes just to responding to the current speaker. And I didn't have this handy when we started. I was going to ask you about our first speaker since we had last week. Let's just do the speaker tonight, and then we'll separate that out from this moment so it doesn't get too confusing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You bet. So 5 minutes and we'll check in. Okay, just a couple more minutes. Okay, so finishing up, one final minute. Okay. Thank you, everyone. So 2 or 3 things as we finish today. And thank you for your good questions. Thanks for participating with today's event and speaker. We'll continue with our speakers next week. I have invited Dr. Len Saputo to join us, and he'll be with us either in person or he'll be on interview format. We're still struggling to clarify if we can do next week's date, but I'll have him and perhaps a second physician talking about the politics of this pandemic and the very split country that we're in, and the views around science are not so left and right as the left would have you say, but they're not actually left and right at all. They're more about scientific views that differ quite a bit, and that some things are being, so it's a media issue. As we've heard today, much of what goes on in alternative healthcare is it's excluded and not included in the larger healthcare dialogue. And so there's a lot of politics around how this pandemic has been played out. So we want to look at that and hear from physicians who are in the trenches trying to represent a view that's not being foregrounded, since this is about alternative health practices. And I'll be posting, you already have some readings up earlier in the semester. I recommend actually looking at what's already posted about broadening and expanding your media diet. And so I'll put some form of suggested reading for next week, but it will be basically about going back to the reading that is listed on, let me give you the exact date. So there's a paper to the terrain versus germ theory, and then the virus and healthcare alternatives. So the second half of that paper, I did not require you to read it at all. If you would glance over that, that's on February 9th, and the virus and healthcare alternatives. So if you would take a look at the second half of that paper, maybe read the first half quickly again if you don't remember it. And that'll help you be prepared for an interesting, and I think inviting conversation, but also surprising to most people here next week. Also, your response paper number 2 will be due, response paper number 1, and I'll have a receptacle for where to turn that paper in just a few minutes after class. I will post that. So as soon as you're ready to pull that response paper together, you can post it on your iLearn site. And again, if you go to the syllabus, it outlines these things that are very specific. They're 1 to 2 pages. I just want to see that you got the core ideas and list those core ideas for each of the presenters. And then what topics or experiences were most beneficial to you and your life. And then add 1 or more additional resources either mentioned by the speaker or talked about in class or your own research about this topic. So let's say you went to Michelle's film company and looked more closely at her. So this shows some effort in getting involved, or maybe you looked at the center that was espoused by our first speaker and looked more at what they're doing, combining community-based healing with indigenous healing and Western medicine. Play it out a little further, show you're involved in some way, and then you should get full credit or close to that. And if you want have a book you're interested in that's related to that topic, anything that seems meaningful to you in addition to our speakers. And that's pretty much it. There'll be a spot for you to turn it in, and I'll try to give you assess your paper and get a grade back to you fairly soon. Any thoughts about that? Great. So we'll be jumping into a whole new series of talks about the impact of media and on our thinking. And a core topic that's up right now, of course, is the war going on in Ukraine. And I know, Julia, you mentioned in the chat box that you're Ukrainian. And would you or anyone else that is familiar with the country and the situation want to share something before we finish class today? I mean to put you on the spot, but it's a very rare moment, and we thought we'd hear from someone who actually was born there, if possible.
I'm actually the first generation born here, so I'm one off from my family. I have some cousins, and we have family friends there. So yeah, it's everything you see. And it's tough. It's going on everywhere in the world. So this is just like an extra added addition to everything else, which is really sad. So
well, Putin seems to be a real bully. Yeah, this feels less like the Russian people than it does their leader. So anyone else have a closing thought or two as we finish today about the world and its state of disarray? Elena?
Yes, I would like to ask you regarding paper again. So you mentioned about we need to provide 3 key points from each or from one of the speaker?
Well, stay after class, I can tell you more, but each speaker, yes. So each speaker, you need to show that you were there and heard something, and what were the core ideas from all 3 of them. But if you want to know more, then we can talk after class, but it talks about it in your syllabus pretty clearly, I think. But I'll be glad to talk with you some more. But anybody have a final thought about the Ukraine or just this moment in time? Anything? Could be something that's came out from today's talk as well.
I just think it's really sad, you know, in the season of nonviolence. I wish we could kind of push that more internationally. I mean, we're not even really pushing it enough nationally. But it's really crazy that we're in a season of nonviolence and this has been allowed to kind of occur, you know, and we are a part of establishing, I don't know if it's peace they're seeking, I'm not even sure what they're seeking, but I just hope we get it resolved sooner rather than later with less humans being taken from this world.
Thank you. And most of you may not know we're hosting the Season for Nonviolence, and every week we have talks about state of the world, what do we do to make a difference, and we'll be hosting. I'll send out our next talk so you all have reference to it, and join us if you like. We'll give you a little extra credit if you do. Next week will be an interesting topic. I'll send it to you. We have three guests, 2 guests and my co-host are presenting, and with my move, I've lost the exact wording of the title, so let me just send it to you and you'll have it. But we're all very committed to seeing if we can make a difference. Everything seems to be driven by money or power. Of course, money is a form of power, and the centralization of power is the primary cause of most of what's happening, according to many people that examine these things for years at a time. And power corrupts, and the people that centralize it want more, and then on we go. So there's people power and there's money power, largely, and political power. And so democracies are having a very hard time right now. We're not doing too well. So in the 21st century, maybe just finish with this. In the 21st century, alternative lifestyles are really what we have left, pretty much, if we want to have a future that makes more sense. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
We'll see you next week.
Hi, Professor.
Yes, Claudia.
Just wanted to say that I got the attendance for today.
Thank you. Thank you for being on that.
Do you want me to keep track of it?
Yeah, please. I think the best way is, I tried to mention last time, maybe it wasn't clear. If you keep track of it just week to week, and then I'll check in with you soon and we'll just see who hasn't been coming. And then I'll try to send out an email to the few that haven't, just to let them know they're not doing well in class if they're staying away. So if you have that gathered together, maybe by next week, then let's see. I'll send out a notice to those who haven't been attending, and we'll announce one more time to class that participation is essential in a class like this.
That sounds good. And then just a few classmates had questions about the recordings, if they were going to be posted on YouTube, but I know you mentioned only the second one was posted, right?
Yeah, the second week has been posted. The first still needs to be edited slightly.
Okay.
And this one should go up. We don't know because there are people helping us do that, and sometimes they're volunteers. They have their own lives. So I hope they'll be up before next week, so you can have access to them. People that weren't here today, as an example. But
okay.
Yeah. So if anyone contacts you, and let's put out if you're willing to put out your email, just in case students within the class have any questions. I'd love to support you knowing everything and helping them.
Yeah.
Sometimes people prefer to talk to a peer. It's just easier for them.
Yeah, of course. I can put my email in my school email in the chat.
Yeah, let's just do that next week when we have the whole class here, and we'll make that announcement, shall we?
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
You too. Thank you for helping.
Bye.
So can I ask you about paper again?
Sure.
So no, I would like to know how you prefer to see a format of those papers.
What's that?
How a format, like how it should be organized? Like, can you give me like an example? How would you like to see the paper should be organized?
Well, did you look at your syllabus?
Yeah, but how this paper should be started? For example, like today we have like 3 speakers, and those they provide us key points, like, and then like list, for example, like Michelle give us like blah blah blah, then like Valerie, she gave us blah blah blah, and then like that's it, or how?
Well, it's not difficult at all. So let me give an example. Here's the syllabus. I have it up for you to look at. So there you go. Let me just put that up so you can see it. So here we are. Here are the 3 people that spoke. Those are the dates. So here's the response paper guidelines. All you have to do, what was this section about? You list the name of the section, February 16th. Name what the topic if you want, or the speaker, either one, because I will be grading all of these. And then you simply list and do what it asks. So what were the ideas? What were the practices that these people talked about? You just name it from your notes. I announced this prior to starting these 3 weeks. And that's all we're still asking, no changes. What did they talk about? And then part B, which topics or experiences that they spoke about were beneficial for you. These are not hard things. C, add one more new additional resource mentioned by the speaker, discovered in class, or from your own research. You pick a topic, that's each of these, you're doing the same thing, A, B, and C.
Okay.
Just like it says on the syllabus. No different, straightforward, no tricks. And you have up to 2 pages to answer these questions.
Yeah, I understand, but it says March 3rd only Michelle, and how about like 2 other people?
Well, that came from those classes. You hopefully attended them. I said, everybody take notes. You'll need them for your response paper. So now you take those notes and you notice what you learned from them and you write about it. It's very straightforward.
It's only, it should be only from indigenous medicine?
Yes. So if you look at the syllabus, response paper number 1 is due next week, March 9th. And it says on section 2. Section 2 is February 16th, February 23rd, March 2nd. All there on the syllabus. So those 3 dates, that's what your response paper is about.
Yes, I understand. But today, March 2nd, today was 3 speakers. Can I mention those 3 people, or I need to take?
I see what you're saying. Well, primarily it's about the 3 that were there the last half of class. But yes, if anything touched you from the speaker, we have 1 speaker and a tiny bit from another. So if you got something from the speaker this morning, yes, absolutely, the first part of the class. Yeah.
Okay. So for example, if I will mention all three from today, I don't need to mention those who were on February 23rd and February 16th.
No, you need to list the primary speaker each of these 3 days and what they talked about. Now, today we did have, usually we don't, usually I lecture, I share a couple of short things. So yes, to show you were in class, show what touched you from those things as well. But you don't have to go into the same depth that you do on these three speakers.
Oh my God, I don't understand anything what you're saying.
Well, it's so simple that maybe you're letting it become something hard, but it's not hard.
No, I mean, like, I would like to mention all three from today, and do not mention.
You can do that, Lena. That's fine. That's really fine. You'd actually be extra if you do that. That would be great.
Yeah, but not mention anybody from February.
No, that doesn't work that way. No.
Okay.
You had to show you were in attendance those days and listen.
Okay, I see.
Yes.
That's right. This is my understanding. Okay, I got you.
Yeah, all 3 dates. That's a response paper from all 3 of those, and it's got the same title: Indigenous/Ancestral Medicine and Healing. How do we integrate ancestral medicine, indigenous medicine, with Western medicine? That's what all 3 of them we're talking about.
I
So
got you.
You're thinking, you're writing your thoughts about that, and each speaker had specific things to say about that. And yes, if you add thoughts that from the others, I will give you some additional. I can't say credit because there's one score for the whole paper, but that will add to the score of your paper. But they are not primary. Primary are the people coming the latter part of class.
Okay.
That the actual speakers themselves.
So, for example, if I'm not mention anybody from February, it means like I have two missed classes, right?
Well, I know you were there at least in part. At least your name was there. I'm not sure if you stayed attending to them, but if you missed, we already have our second speaker, the February 23rd speaker, up on our YouTube site.
Okay.
So you can go back to the YouTube. So go to Holistic Health Studies -SFSU, and you can listen to her. And I hope we'll get the first speaker up shortly, but our volunteer hasn't been able to both yet. So.
And for example, can I, for example, click on the link and see they for example, like Freedom Community Clinic or not?
Well, that would be part C of that day's paper, right? It asks you come up with an additional resource.
Okay.
That relates to the speaker and what they talked about. So if you went to their website, but first of all, you have to talk about what did they talk about, and then what impacted you, and then you can go to their website or something that's related to what they talked about, and just talk very briefly about that. Just mention something briefly.
Okay, I got you.
Okay.
I will try to. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, have a good one.
You bet. See you next week.